Well, hello. Welcome to Renewed Mind Bible Studies. Just a quick debrief for those who might be new or newer to it. It's a little different from a church service. We just jump right into it. We look at the original language. We try to see what it meant then, apply it to what it would mean now. And we try to have a good mailing list go so that you guys get it in advance. There's follow-up personal study plans that come out afterwards. So if you need help getting on that email list, just see me afterwards. Or you can send me an email to blake@libertync.org. Tonight, we're jumping into the last half of 1 Peter chapter 2. So we'll be covering verses 13 through 25. So if you are ready to go, we'll jump in shortly. I just want to talk about a word that everybody loves. That word is obedience. See, there's people cheering already. It's controversial. When you hear about it, you might think of training a dog, or you might think about the constant lectures with children. Or sometimes you can think about the way that some people like to frame it within the context of marriage when it comes to husband and wife, and the way that sometimes it gets skewed or whatever. Obedience is hard because it always feels like it comes across in a way that is forced. But obedience has a lot of different variations to it. There is a certain kind of obedience that is easy. Like when you say yes to something you already agree with. When somebody says, "Do you want seconds of this?" It's easy to say, "Well, yes, I would. Eat up. I don't want to see any of this left on the table." I mean, a lot of times these are the things that we say that, or when you show respect to somebody that you admire. But what about when you're told to submit to authority that seems unworthy? What about when obedience seems unfair or inconvenient, or it costs you something? That's what's really going to be addressed at the core of tonight's teaching. Peter's addressing this intentionally because he understands that, once again, these are believers that are scattered. They are in foreign nations, foreign cultures. They are now being misunderstood, overlooked, looked down upon if they are looked upon at all. And so he's telling them, don't buck up in a way that is going to ruin your witness. There is a way to handle this situation. This is not passively letting people do whatever they want to you. Sometimes we hear this, we turn the other cheek, we put it out of context. And sometimes Christians, it's like we live like we have to be abused by the people around us for the sake of the gospel. And I'm here to tell you that that's not the case. But I'm going to give you just a brief example as we move forward. There's a man by the name of William Wilberforce, and some of you may be familiar with his name. He was a British politician in the late 1700s. He was best known for his decades-long fight to abolish the slave trade in the British Empire. What really makes it appropriate and powerful for this study is that he navigated an unjust system with deep conviction, but he showed respect to the very institution that was doing what was unjust. And so he worked within the system until the system itself changed. So how long did it take him? Any guesses how long it took William Wilberforce? It took him more than 20 years of patient endurance, but his persistence, which was always marked with humility and respect for where he was, it led to the passage of the Slave Trade Act in 1807, and later helped dismantle slavery itself. So the kind of teaching that we're hearing tonight, it pushes against everything that our culture values today. So you can just prepare yourself for that. We are told to stand up for ourselves, speak our truth, and never let anybody take advantage of us. And Peter reminds us that we follow a Savior who was silent in the face of injustice, and he could only do it out of a place of strength. And when we choose Jesus' way, and we don't just do it our way, we don't just survive hardship, we can actually shine through it. So this session is for anybody who's really felt like they've been treated unfairly, looked down on, hurt by someone in authority. This is how we talk about honoring God regardless of where we find ourselves. So we'll just go and we'll do the first couple of verses 13 through 15. This first section is called Honor That Transforms. And here's what it says, 1 Peter chapter 2, verses 13 through 15. For the Lord's sake, submit to all human authority, whether the king as head of state or the officials he has appointed. For the king has sent them to punish those who do wrong and honor those who do right. It is God's will that your honorable lives should silence those ignorant people who make foolish accusations against you. Well, Peter doesn't really start this with a suggestion or helpful advice. He just starts with a command that is uncomfortable to literally anybody that I would know to ask, where he says, submit to all human authority. He doesn't say in certain circumstances. He just says submit to all human authority. And it gets even more intense when he says why to do it. He starts by saying, for the Lord's sake. So he starts by saying, submit to human authority for the Lord's sake. In other words, how we respond when to authority is not just a civic issue, it's a spiritual one. At least it is for those of us that belong to the Lord. And it reflects how seriously we take our identity as God's people in a world that's watching us. So your first blank there, the Greek word for submit there is hypotagete. It literally means to arrange yourself under, right? So under, willingly. It's the image of somebody choosing to come under leadership or order. In this case, it's not because they're forced to, it's because they trust God more than they trust the system. Anybody here trust God more than you trust the system? Okay, all right, good. I have to. That would have sounded radical even to Peter's original audience. Remember, that early church that was scattered, they were in a variety of different governmental issues and authority type issues. Some of them were hostile and cruel and violent towards Christians in specific. So when Peter says to submit to the emperor or to the king, he's not saying only if they're godly. This is uncomfortable. He's not saying only if the law is fair. He is saying live with honor in a system that won't always honor you. The goal isn't compliance, it's credibility. This is not to make you fall in line in a world that is broken and is trying to steer you away from God. This is about your credibility within the system for the sake of those who are in it and for the sake of the Lord himself. Because anybody can follow rules when it benefits them. Anybody can follow rules when they agree with the rules. But when believers honor authority, even when it's uncomfortable, when they choose restraint over being outraged, and they choose making peace over making a scene, a lot of other people will stop and wonder why. So, for us, we're trying to build credibility, not just for us as people, but for the God that we represent. We shouldn't just obey to avoid punishment, but we obey to point people towards a kingdom that is higher than any human system. Our credibility is what opens doors for conversations. Now, Peter goes on to say these people are sent to, pronounce judgment, keep you from what's wrong and all of this. And I think we all know the government doesn't always do that. But in verse 14, this is what he says: the king has sent them to punish those who do wrong and to honor those who do right. That's the general role of the government, no matter where you are. And even in ancient Rome, the goal was to preserve order, punish wrongdoing, and reward good. And of course, we know that it did not always play out that way then, much like it doesn't always now. Governments were often corrupt, inconsistent, and frequently had unjust rules. But Peter isn't saying that you should trust the government blindly. He is saying that we trust God ultimately. And even when human systems are broken, our behavior reflects that we belong to a different kingdom. And this is where it really hits home for us, because everybody here, everybody has a platform and everybody has an opinion. And honor feels like it's a lost art today. It is easy to justify disrespect when somebody that we look at, we feel like they're undeserving, especially when we feel like what we're doing is taking a stand for the Lord. Every time I go to take a stand for the Lord, again, might be controversial, I have to ask myself, did the Lord ask me to take this stand for him? He's a big boy. Peter does not say submit to all authority when they earn your respect or when they honor God. So, what does this not mean? Well, this does not mean silence in the face of evil. Some laws are evil. Some acts are evil. Some people act in evil ways. Even the people that act in evil ways, though, are still made in the image of the Lord. It definitely doesn't mean ignoring injustice or pretending that harm didn't happen to people. That's how harm gets perpetrated and grows. But it does mean that the way you carry yourself needs to be different than the world. When the world rejoices that somebody's been caught and has gotten exposed, we do not rejoice. We mourn because they missed the mark for what God had for them. And I don't care about their race, nationality, political allegiance. We should mourn that somebody who was made in the image of God has fallen so far away from him. Our conduct has to be marked with integrity. We have to be consistent in how we feel about that. Again, might be controversial to some, but Christians should not be known for being combative. We can stand up for what is right, but we shouldn't be known as the ones that pick fights. We need to be the ones who are consistent regardless of the situation. And sometimes the most Christ-like thing that you can do is to disagree without dishonor. So in verse 15, Peter says this. He says, it's God's will that your honorable lives should silence those ignorant people who make foolish accusations against you. Well, here's the problem. We do one of two things. We will either align ourselves with a popular opinion and we'll feel safe within it, or we will keep ourselves silent because we don't want to have foolish accusations brought against us. And even though it feels good to hear that our honorable lives will silence the foolish accusations, I don't want to skip over that without telling you the accusations will still come. There will still be things talked about, things said about you. It comes with it, but your life is what ultimately silences it. It's not your better argument. Okay, so the Greek word for honorable there is agathopoiuntas. It means doing what is good, generous, and here's your blank, beneficial. Sometimes, I'll say this until I'm blue in the face, sometimes you can win the argument and you can lose the person. And when you get to heaven one day and you tell the Lord how you shut that person down and you put them in their place, and then you say, hey, I don't see them here, where are they? I just can't imagine that that's anybody's goal here. It means doing what's good, generous, and beneficial. And Peter is saying that we have to have such consistent goodness that it shuts down false assumptions. Even if somebody's not a believer, you should have such a reputation that when somebody says you've done something, that the outsiders would say, that doesn't sound like them. This is convicting. Most of us want to fight words with more words. But Peter says that our lives are what should do the talking. When, not if, somebody slanders you, I want you to know that your integrity should stand taller than their accusations. And when they look for reasons to reject your faith, they should be disarmed by how well you live it out. Think about just today's culture. So many people assume that Christians are judgmental or angry or uninformed. And sadly, sometimes we confirm that with how we speak about those that we disagree with, especially in politics. It's okay to disagree. Just be careful how you word it. Peter says, silence them with your life. Let your patience confuse them. Let your humility be what confronts them. And let your peace be what is most unsettling to them. You are not living this life just for yourselves, Christians. You are representing a kingdom that is not here. And that means that the way you treat your boss, the way that you respond to a local law, or speak about government leaders, or post online, all of it is an opportunity to glorify God, or it's an opportunity to distort him to people who don't know him yet. So what will you choose? Personal insights. Where do I struggle to honor leadership, especially when I disagree? Just food for thought. And how might my attitude toward authority impact my witness to those watching my life? Everybody's got a different set of eyes on their life, don't they? Next two verses, we're calling this free to submit. Verses 16 and 17. Peter says, for you are free, yet you are God's slaves. So don't use your freedom as an excuse to do evil. Respect everyone and love the family of believers. Fear God and respect the king. Okay, well, Peter now says something that also would have felt upside down in Roman society. He says, you are free, but you're also slaves. And not just any slaves, he says you are slaves of God. This is terminology you don't even find in the Old Testament. But the Greek word for slaves here is douloi. It's a word used to describe someone who belonged entirely to another. This is why this matters for Roman culture. In Roman culture, freedom was the highest value. So to say you're free and you're a slave was a paradox, but believers, for us, it's that paradox itself that sets us free in this life. So Peter is saying, because you belong to God, nobody else owns you, regardless of where you find yourself in life. He says your worth, your future, and your value are not tied to your job or your title or even your citizenship. He says you are free, but that freedom isn't a pass to live selfishly. It is a call to live all more purposefully than ever before. He says don't use your freedom as an excuse to do evil. Well, the Greek word there for excuse is epikalome. It means like a covering or a cloak. That one's not in your notes. It's like a cloak. So he's saying don't use it as something to mask what's really going on. Don't hide rebellion under the banner of grace. Don't treat your spiritual freedom as a mask for pride, because God is never honored. This matters today too, because I just hear things on a regular basis. I hear, I didn't do it on purpose. You can't tell me what to do. I'm just being me. And Peter is saying that true freedom isn't about getting your way. It's about surrendering your way After all, think about this. You can't even surrender if you weren't free to begin with. And God gives you the choice to surrender to him or not. It's the freedom to love when it's inconvenient. Nobody can make you love. Nobody can make you serve another human being unless you choose to. And to serve somebody when you're unnoticed is sometimes worse than to serve when it's inconvenient. Some of us don't mind serving one another when it's inconvenient because we find our identity in being the person who can answer that call and get something done and be there for them. Can you do it when you're unnoticed and when there's no thank you? So to submit, not because you have to, but because you choose to, it has to be out of reverence for the Lord and not for human beings. So here comes this list of short, direct commands in verse 17. There's 4 of them. And Peter tells us how to actually live out this kind of submission. The first one he says to do is to respect everyone. Who do we respect? Everyone. Yes, even who just popped into your head. Not just people who are kind to you. That Greek word right there, timao, it means to honor and treat as valuable. That means we treat people like they matter because they do. I remember having a coach in middle school who used to always call me Mr. Larson, and he would always say sir or ma'am when he was talking to the students. And I'm like, we're 11, what are you doing? And I remember telling him one time, I'm not a sir, I'm just a kid. I grew up here and I don't even own anything. Everything I have belongs to my mom. So when I'm talking to him and he says sir, and I said, why do you call me sir? And he said, because you're worthy of respect. And honestly, even at 11 or 12, my first thought was, you don't know me that well, right? But the reality is, I'm a human being, right? So there's a base level of respect that there should be. We treat people like they matter. Why do we treat them like they matter? Because they matter. It wasn't a trick question. Every person is made in the image of God, even the ones who do things differently, and especially the ones who irritate you. All right, second one, we are to love the family of believers. This is also an uncomfortable thought. Why is that an uncomfortable thought? Christians are love. Because over and over again, you find through Scripture that there's a special affection reserved for those in the family of faith. What a blessing it is for those of us when our family members know the Lord and they're blood family and they're also in the family of faith. But specifically, he goes out of his way. He's not talking about the family unit that you grew up in. He's saying, love the family of believers. And he is calling the church to real affection, not polite tolerance. I'm starting to really hate the word tolerance. The word for love here is agapeo. It is that sacrificial, covenant-keeping kind of love that God exhibits. And now Peter says that's the kind of love you need to have for every other believer. And then he says, fear God. Not dear God, but fear God. That word again, right there, it is phobesthe. It means in reverent awe. We just spoke about this on Sunday as we talked about the fear of the Lord is the beginning of wisdom. And he says we need to fear God. We need to live with the awareness that your life is unfolding before a holy and sovereign God who is going to look at it and make a judgment on how you've lived it. This fear doesn't push you away from God. It's actually the kind of awe that draws you close. You want to please him because you love him and you know how pure and holy he is. And then finally comes the most uncomfortable one out of all 4, where he says to respect the king. I want you to think about the politician that you hate the worst. The one that you think was worst in office, did the worst stuff to this country. Don't say their names out loud. We're not looking to get into fistfights tonight. Just think about them. They are nothing compared to Emperor Nero. And that's your blank. I don't care who you're thinking of. They are nothing compared to Emperor Nero. And for those of you who are a little bit of a history buff, yes, it is that Nero that was in charge when Peter wrote this. The same Nero that would soon launch a violent persecution against Christians. The same one that burned Rome and blamed Christians. The one who used to light his gardens at night with the bodies of martyred Christians while he would ride around and laugh at the ones that were being burned alive. We have not endured that in today's day and age, have we? And Peter writes, respect the king. Peter's not being naive, and he's definitely not being passive if you have followed Peter's story through the scriptures. He understands the cruelty of those that are in power right now. We say we can't respect politicians because of a bill they support or something in their political platform, but Peter was encouraging these believers to respect Nero while he lit their family members on fire. And today he would say the same thing. He would say, respect the king. Now, you don't have to respect a thing that he does, but you do have to respect the divine spark that he was created in the image of God. And is this difficult? For sure. But if anybody told you Christianity was going to be easy, I apologize on their behalf. Why is Peter making a big deal out of this? He's not trying to write a political manifesto. He's writing a letter to exiles who are now facing all sorts of other kings and other rulers that are underneath the most unjust one. And he knows that the power integrity has in the face of injustice is incredible. He would never tell them to approve of evil. He is telling them to rise above it and to live honorably in a dishonorable world. This was actually a courageous thing for Peter to write. It still is, to be honest with you. Most preachers do not like preaching that, in specific, depending on the political season. Submitting to authority does not mean endorsing sin. I just want to make that very clear. It means choosing the higher way in how you address it, not the easier way. There's a lot of things I could say on any given Sunday and get a whole room full of amens and have about 15 or 20 people decide to never walk back into church again. And I just don't know that that's worth it. Again, the goal is not compliance, it's credibility with an unbelieving world. When we live in humility, even under hardship, we declare something that is louder than a protest. We proclaim that Jesus is still king. So how do we do that as exiles? We don't withdraw and we don't rebel. We endure. Tonight is called Exiles Who Endure. It's easy to withdraw and then we don't have to deal with it anymore. It's also easy to make our opinions heard in a way that's aggressive because then we feel like we're doing something and we're actually called to exist inside of this tension, this in-between, and hold the line. In the end, the goal isn't just to be right, it's to reflect God. So personal insights, here's some things to just give you so you can take a look at your own life. Where in my life do I confuse personal freedom with spiritual maturity? And that's a pretty deep question when you think about it, because I remember when I was a kid thinking, one day I'll be old enough I can have ice cream for dinner if I want. I can do all sorts of things if I want. You know what happens when you have ice cream for dinner? It's a bad time the rest of the night. I'm just going to tell you. I'm free to do it. Doesn't mean that it was a mature decision. I'll just throw it that way. What area in my life am I most tempted to use my freedom selfishly instead of serving others? Well, since we're talking about enduring, let's go ahead and cover the next 3 verses, 18 through 20. Here's what Peter says. You who are slaves must submit to your masters with all respect. Do what they tell you, not only if they're kind and reasonable, but even if they are cruel. For God is pleased when, conscious of his will, you patiently endure unjust treatment. Of course, you get no credit for being patient if you are beaten for doing wrong, but if you suffer for doing good and endure it patiently, God is pleased with you. Well, that's super comfortable, isn't it? This is one of the most difficult sections in Peter's letter. It has been one of the most manipulated and abused scriptures throughout American history. And it's not hard to understand what he's saying, but if you just take it and you put it completely out of context, it is an incredibly manipulative verse. This is not hard to understand, it's hard to accept. But as you go through the Proverbs this month, and everybody's reading through the Proverbs, right? As you're going through the Proverbs this month, what you'll find as we get towards the end is a really cool verse that says, hey, don't correct a mocker. It's not going to go well for you. And it'll also say, hey, don't let a mocker go uncorrected, because then they'll think they're right. It's in the same verse. Sometimes the Bible's not giving you an exact set of footprints to follow on what to do, but it is giving you context so you can exercise this wisdom, and we're going to talk about that. Remember that Peter is writing to people in the Roman Empire. Regardless of where they are, it's still part of the Roman Empire. Slavery was the social norm, and slavery here was not based on race, but it was often based on class, conquest, or financial debt. I mean, some of us were like, I can't believe I had to file for bankruptcy. Well, back in the day, it was a lot worse when you hit bankruptcy. Some slaves in this culture were well treated. Some were not. Some served in households or businesses while others worked brutal manual labor. And Peter doesn't call for rebellion or political overthrow even there. Why? Peter is acknowledging the reality that these believers were living in and showing them how to honor God even when they find themselves in an unfair system. In fact, the Greek word for slave there is not the same one we just talked about when we talked about slaves of God. The word slave there is actually the word oiketai. It means household servants. Peter is writing to the vulnerable and telling them that their faith still has weight and worth. They matter in the kingdom. So when he says submit to your masters with all respect, even if they're cruel, that word for respect, and this blew my mind, is phobos. It's the same one used earlier for reverent fear towards God. It's where we get phobia. That blew my mind because he's not saying that they shouldn't be afraid of people. He's saying submit to one another out of your fear and reverence for God. You're not doing this because your master is worthy. You're doing it because your life is a witness to the one who is worthy. And that's a massive mind shift regardless of where we find ourselves today. But Peter also says something that's very easy to miss if you don't slow down, but it's incredibly important, where he says God is pleased. Now, this is part of what was used to manipulate the scripture in past eras of American history, but it's not because injustice is okay sometimes. It's because your response to it matters. He's not ever asking you to pretend that whatever you're going through is okay or that it's fair. God knows that it's not fair when we endure things that are unjust. He's just showing that when you choose to endure mistreatment while keeping your eyes on God, it still honors him. Why? Because what do most of us do when we're treated unfairly? We take our eyes off of God. Most of us don't run to the prayer closet and say, I was really mistreated by my friend. Lord, would you just convict them and bless them and elevate them and have them have a richer knowledge of you? No, we would rather read those scriptures David's got where he's like, Lord, would you just break the teeth of my enemy? Would you just have them fall on a rock? That would be great. But this is really important because the phrase conscious of his will that we just read literally means you're aware of God in the situation. The situation is unjust, but the primary thought that's in your head is to be conscious of God's will. It doesn't mean your situation is his will, but how you live, regardless of where you are, very much is within his will. And that's how we endure. That kind of endurance isn't weakness, it's actually worship. So let's talk about that word endure, since endure has come up so much tonight. That word is hupophoro, and that means to bear up under pressure or to carry a heavy load without collapsing. That's your blank. This is truly what it is to have strength under fire. It's an endurance that says, even when things are unfair, I will still honor God with how I carry this. Why? Well, because anybody can be patient when they're wrong, when they're the one that's wrong, right? So that's what verse 20 says. It says, of course, you get no credit for being patient if you're beaten for doing wrong. That's just cause and effect is what he's saying. He's saying what gets God's attention is when you suffer unjustly and you still respond with faith. So I've mentioned it just briefly earlier at the beginning of this, but it's important to pause here and just say it clearly. All forms of slavery rooted in injustice, abuse, and dehumanization are inexcusable, and they're all opposed to the heart of God. The American slave trade, it targeted and exploited African men, women, and children based on their race. It was an evil institution that just can't be justified by Scripture, even though they did. It actually more closely resembled the harshest parts of Roman slavery, even though that's not often highlighted in a lot of places. But the Romans had a system where people were often beaten, raped, sold, and stripped of dignity instead of the kind of servanthood that Peter addresses here. And that difference matters a great deal. We have to understand what was happening there. I've many times heard people say, well, you have to understand back in Bible days, slavery wasn't as bad. No, a lot of places it was pretty awful. It's always opposed to the heart of God. And even in Peter's day, not all of that was the same. The Bible actually goes out of its way back in Exodus. It talks about servanthood could sometimes be voluntary, especially in Jewish history. Exodus 21 talks about a servant who, out of love for the master and the household, could desire to remain a part of the household and could willingly commit for life. But you can see the difference between servanthood and slavery here, I'm sure. At least I hope that you can. It was a symbolic piercing of the ear to the awl of the door frame that allowed them to become a permanent member of the household. And this was something that was chosen. It wasn't something that was coerced or because it was a last-second option. So it's important to know that. Why? Because how do we live in light of God? It's voluntary servanthood. He calls us slaves of God, but you have to choose, I want to commit my life there and serve regardless of it. So when we read this passage today, we have to read it carefully. I want to make it super clear. Peter's not endorsing oppressive systems. He is simply speaking to believers who were already in those systems, who could not change their position, and one letter from a rogue apostle was not going to change their situation, but he could help them choose how to respond. So even today, it's a word for anybody who finds themselves under unfair authority, an unjust boss, a broken system, or maybe even in an uneven relationship. Peter is saying, even here, your faith matters, and even here, your endurance can honor God. God's not watching to see if we can put up with it. He's watching to see if we still reflect him when we're suffering. Credibility always comes when you see other people living out their faith in hard places, and you know that it's real. So remember, endurance isn't weakness. It is always, always, always worship. It's a statement that your heart belongs to someone greater than your circumstances, and that is always the kind of faith that pleases God. A couple personal insights for you on this section. Where in my life am I being called to endure simply because it's faithful? I mean, sometimes God has an escape route planned for you, but it's not right now. And the second one, how have I let injustice or hardship distract me from the power of my testimony? That's the one that kind of got me as I was writing this. All right, last few verses, 21 through 25. We wrap up chapter 2 tonight. 1 Peter chapter 2, 21 through 25. This is Christ. He is our pattern, and he is our peace. He says, "For God called you to do good, even if it means suffering, just as Christ suffered for you. He is your example, and you must follow in his steps." Verse 22, it says, "He never sinned, nor ever deceived anyone. He did not retaliate when he was insulted, nor threaten revenge when he suffered. He left his case in the hands of God, who always judges fairly." Verse 24 says, "He personally carried our sins in his body on the cross so that we can be dead to sin and live for what is right. By his wounds, you're healed." That one we hear quoted a lot, don't we? Just the rest of it. Verse 25, he says, "Once you were like sheep who wandered away, but now you have turned to your shepherd, the guardian of your souls." Well, Peter ends this section with one of the most eloquent gospel summaries in the entire New Testament. And it is not just about what Jesus did for us, it's about how we're called to live like him while we're here. And that may sound like a heavy charge, because who can walk up here and say, "I'm living like Jesus, y'all, watch my life"? But that is where your peace comes from, is when that's the goal. It's worth the pursuit. When you stop fighting for control and you start trusting the one who has already carried your wounds inside of him, you find a whole new kind of strength. So Peter begins with a calling. He says, God called you to do good, even if it means suffering. How many times have we tried to do something good and we say, "Man, this is thankless," or "Man, this is hard. It's a heavy thing to carry." God gets it. This is a discipleship assignment from Peter. The Greek word there, for example, is hupogramos, and it refers to a writing template or a tracing pattern used by students learning to write. In other words, Peter is saying that Jesus left a pattern to trace with our lives. I think about this because I got kids that love to trace things. They love to trace these pictures and say, "Look what I drew." And I mean, their art's getting better and better all the time, but I remember doing this. How much more important to do this with our lives? And then he quotes from Isaiah chapter 53, one of the clearest prophecies about the suffering Messiah that we worship today. Listen to this pattern that we're called to pursue. He mentions things like this. He says he never sinned, he never deceived, he didn't retaliate, and he didn't threaten. Instead, Peter goes out of his way to say that Jesus left his case in the hands of God, who always judges fairly. And this might be one of the hardest ways to imitate Jesus, just to be honest with you. Jesus did not fight back in his own pride. He didn't try to win the argument. He just asked God to be the judge. How different would it be if whenever we felt wronged, we just went to the prayer closet and said, "Lord, I'll just ask you to cast judgment on this." The reality is sometimes we don't want God to be the judge because we know he's going to hand down judgment on both sides of it. We just want judgment to come down on the other side. For us, this means sometimes we have to walk away from gossip, or refuse to clap back in person or online, or choose the spiritual high road when your flesh wants to go low. Verse 24 shifts from the example to why. It says that he personally carried our sins in his body on the cross. All the times that we hear about what Jesus did on the cross, we often don't hear that one quoted. But he personally carried all of your sins in his body on the cross. I really want you to hear this. Jesus bore the weight of every single failure you've ever had, every wound you've ever had, every wound you've ever caused, every injustice you've ever endured or taken part in, every awful thought that you had where you said, thank God people can't read my mind. He did this to forgive you and to free you. And now that he's freed you, we've just seen the pattern on how we're supposed to live out that freedom. And Peter says, so that we can be dead to sin and live for what is right. This is the trade. His wounds for your healing. And we have to live like it. So Peter echoes Isaiah again. He says, by his wounds, you're healed. Not just physically, although I'm a big believer that physical healing is something God still does. But spiritual healing, emotional healing, and relational healing is available for us too. Jesus was actually torn apart so that you and I could be made whole. So in verse 25, think about that as he says, once you were like sheep who wandered away, but now you've turned to your shepherd, the guardian of your souls. And that word guardian in the Greek is episkopo. It is the same word used for a spiritual overseer or protector. That blank is protector. By the way, that's also where the Episcopal Church gets its name from, because they're led by overseers. Peter is saying that you're not alone anymore. You are not vulnerable anymore. You are not lost or directionless anymore. You are not left to figure out life by yourself. You are under the care of a shepherd who sees your scars. He sees all of your fears, your failures, and he walks with you. And so it's kind of cool that we get to close chapter 2 with this, but Christians, this is the gospel. Jesus died for us, yes, but he also walked ahead of us, and now he walks with us. So if you are suffering for doing good, or if you're misunderstood, overlooked, or enduring something that feels unfair, Peter just says, trace his pattern, walk in his peace, and remember who is truly watching over your soul. 2 personal insights there. First of all, where am I tempted to fight for control or to retaliate instead of trusting God to judge fairly? And then, am I living more like someone who's wandering or like someone who is led by the shepherd? If you're watching on the live stream, at this point, we're going to cut for group discussion at tables, but the notes are attached to this